Okay, I'm recording now with Curtis Murphy. Curtis, welcome.
Welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. We're doing this interview for students at Elmhurst College who are interested in growing up and becoming someone just like Curtis. And so I thought it would be an excellent opportunity to find out more about him. Curtis, can you start by telling us about your background, where you work, how you got there, how you made a career of this?
Sure. So I'm the technical director at Alion Science and Technology. I work in Norfolk, and my background is primarily as software developer. So I'm an engineer, I'm a coder, hacker, builder, engineer, and most recently my specialty has become game design.
Game design.
Yeah.
Game design for serious games, for
Game
teaching.
design for serious games. That's right. I build training games for a living, and that's not what I always did. So you asked about how that I got here to this point. I've been doing training games for a long time, and I would have to say it was kind of a dream opportunity that came up. When I first interviewed with Alion, I was really, really deeply fascinated by the fact that they were doing modeling and simulation. And they were doing this really, really high-tech, distributed networking, simulation type stuff. So I went in to get an interview with them, and there was snafu on the first day that I came in. And I went home that night thinking I had completely failed. I had completely lost this opportunity. And as it turns out, the division manager called me up and said, "We made the mistake. Come back in, do another interview." And the reason that that's relevant is that I came in, and on my first day, I came in sort of hungry, like, oh my gosh, I almost missed this great opportunity, and now I have this chance to sort of redeem myself. And every day after that, I pursued it with a great deal of passion, not just at my work time, after my work time, reading books at home, going home at night and working on my own skills, improving my programming, reading management books, reading leadership books, reading speaking books. And a few months in, my division manager pulled me in. He said, "Hey, we've got your first project. We want you to lead this project." I said, "Okay, great. What is it?" "We want you to build a game." And I thought he was kidding me and teasing me about this idea of what? I don't understand. A game? Game? Yes, we want you to build a training game. So sure enough, that was my first training game project. And
Wow.
that was it was a decade ago.
Wow.
I
So
turned that
you
project
jumped
into
in cold. I mean, you didn't have any warning that that was coming, and suddenly you're a
yeah,
game designer.
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And that's how it started. Yeah.
Maybe you should take just a few seconds and tell people what Allianz does, what their mission and purpose is, their business.
Sure, absolutely. Alion is a employee-owned company. We're about 3,000 employees, and most of our business, at least the business that I'm involved in, is related to modeling and simulation. So we build the very, very large distributed network training environments, primarily for the military, Navy, that sort of thing. So that would mean, for instance, they would have a live ship, maybe out of Norfolk Base, connected to another live ship in San Diego, connected to guys on the ground in a field somewhere out in the desert, maybe 29 Palms, connected to people in Orlando, connected to guys at a computer pretending to drive a Humvee, and guys pretending to fly UAVs, all connected in this idea that they call live, virtual, and constructive. And all of these things are connected together and distributed, and they're all simulating an activity, and then they practice. And that's how they practice without getting hurt.
Fascinating. Sounds like very complicated and challenging work because of all the different players involved in the game.
It is. It's a massive undertaking to do that.
Right. Well, I think the way I think about serious games is that there are probably four corners or four pillars. Uh, there's subject matter expertise, which is not design and it's not technology. It's just knowing something, being an expert at something and knowing what has to be conveyed to the audience. And
Right.
then beyond that, there's instructional design and game design. And then there is technology, there's implementation.
Right.
So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those uh, pillars as regards your experience and the work you do at Allianz.
Sure. So a few years ago, the Navy approached us and they said, we have a problem. The problem is that most of the people entering the Navy workforce, they're about 18, 19. They just graduated high school. So they go up to Chicago, very near to where you are, up at Great Lakes, and they go to the Recruit Training Command. And they have to teach them everything that it means to become a sailor as part of the most elite naval force in the world. And they only have 8 weeks to do it. And some of the things that they have to teach them are quite difficult. For instance, the sailors have to go into a ship. They're on their ship. It's out at sea. They have to go into a room that's underneath the surface of the ocean. This room is filling full of water. It's coming out of a huge pipe. The water's rising up among their ankles, their clothes. And they have to go into this room, grab the door, lock themselves inside. They have to fix it or the ship sinks. This kind of stuff is really, really difficult to teach. So they asked us, can you do that? Can you make a training game that would help? We said, absolutely we can. And we did. And the project was so successful that we ended up doing studies and showing that it had a 50 to 80% improvement in their performance. Now this is just a recruit sits at a computer for 1 hour with no instructors and he plays a training game. And he gets a 50% improvement in his performance that actually transfers to the real world. To build that, though, requires a whole range of disciplines. So you mentioned subject matter experts. For that project, that was the Navy, the people who knew about ships and training ships. The instructional designers, they come in and they say, well, okay, this is all the knowledge. Let's chunk it down and break it into parts and the cognitive theories and all of these different things, workload and all the kind of pieces, and then they do this huge analysis on it. And then from that, they narrow in and say, we're going to teach this and this and this. These are the 3 things that we're going to teach. And what does that look like? Then we have the game designers. So the game designer, in this case me, says, okay, well, you want to teach this, this, and this is the context of the Navy. So this is the kind of game we're going to build. It's going to look like this, and they're going to go here, and they're going to navigate the ship to get to the pipe, and they're going to pick up the pieces and come back. And this is the kind of thing that we need to do that. And then you have the technology. So for me, that would have been my engineers building the engine itself, building the graphics, building the capability to have interfaces and buttons and things pop up, and the ability to pick up and hold and have inventory. Those are things that we code. And I would add there's a 5th pillar to game design, game development, and that's art. Art really is an entire other classification of capabilities, and that's the ability to create a 3D environment or a 2D environment or the 2D textures for the UIs or models of humans and avatars and speaking and all the things that have to do with that make up art.
Interesting. Now let me just probe a little bit on the subject of simulation, because gaming is often paired with simulation, and it sounds like in the project you described, you're simulating operations on ships, and at the same time a game is being played. So can you talk about the how simulation and gaming kind of complement each other? They're different things, aren't they?
We get this question sometimes, and I remember I was having a conversation with my boss, and we ended up stuck at this point, like, what's the difference? And I think in the end, it works out to be sort of like a spectrum. So on the one hand, we have simulation. These really, really complex, networked, distributed simulations designed to teach experts all kinds of things. So that's on the one hand. And then the other hand, on the other side of this spectrum here, I think we have training games. And training games might be designed just like to teach these novice recruits how to navigate a ship or do communication. And the question then is, what is the line? What is it that's changing that distinguishes the two? It's not enough to say, well, this is the one, then that's on the other. What's the difference? The difference comes down to simplicity. And that really is, in essence, the key difference between a simulation and a game. On this end, They're very, very complex. They're designed for expert users. They have lots and lots of capabilities, extremely deep in what they're providing. And over here, we have a game, maybe designed for a novice or intermediate level skill. And the interface is very simple. There's limited choices. Everything's designed to be intuitive. Everything's designed to be, from the player's perspective, simple. So under the covers down here, you might still have a simulation. Right? The details of what's going on in the engine could still be quite complicated, as complicated as what's over here on the advanced side. The difference is what you would present to the player would not be complex. It would be simple.
Okay. Now, the verb that's always employed when talking about games is play. You play a game.
Right.
And the word play, of course, it has a serious gravity in terms of the research and the meaning of the term. But play is almost always connected with fun. And when people come to serious games, despite the word serious, they're expecting enjoyment to be at least a byproduct of the experience of the game. And if the game is not fun at all, someone is going to say, well, it's not really a game anymore. It's just it's training masquerading as a game.
Right.
So tell me about how important or relevant the experience of enjoyment is to the design of the kinds of serious games that you do.
So the word fun gets thrown around a lot, and I have used it a lot, and I've written about it a lot, and spoken about it, and I think it's the wrong word altogether. I also don't think that play is really that relevant either. I think the word that to me most sums up why we use games to do training is the word flow.
Flow.
Flow. So flow, I'm sure you're aware of this, is research by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and it's that state of existence that we get in where nothing else matters. We all do it. It's a core part of being human, whether we're reading a book, we're having a social interaction, you and I are talking, we're playing a game. And the reason that we go after games is because games are specifically designed to meet all the core requirements to get into a state of flow. So it's a funny thing if you ask people, do you really enjoy this? Well, I don't know. Why do you do that hobby? It seems like you always get hurt, you fall down a lot, it's very brutal, it's physically demanding. Why do you keep doing that hobby? Well, they do that hobby because it puts them in a state of flow and they really enjoy the feeling that they have of being in that state. And that's exactly what we experience with the Navy sailors, or whether we're going to teach medicine. It doesn't matter. The concept is not did they have fun, because what's fun? Some people chess is fun. To some people reading a book is fun. Other people hate books and other people hate chess, and some people will like first-person shooters and some people like Angry Birds. Well, they're not all fun to all people. The key is that people are in flow when they're playing those experiences.
Right. I also think, as I was listening to you, I also was holding on to the term enjoyment, because it did seem that you were saying that in a state of flow, which the game makes possible for you, you are enjoying yourself, whether or not you're succeeding or failing or in pain or laughing. It doesn't matter, but you are enjoying the experience versus wishing you were somewhere else.
Correct. There's really interesting psychology of being in flow. When we're in flow, we almost are not aware of the fact that we're enjoying the experience. We are immersed in this experience so much that the only thing that matters is the experience. So we're not even having a meta-awareness of, hey, I'm in flow right now and I'm really enjoying this. Instead, what we're doing is we're completely immersed. That's when you're doing something when, like, seconds just seemed like they were lasting hours, right? You were deeply in something, you're like, holy cow, that whole experience was 30 seconds, and yet it felt like you were thinking for a long time. Or the whole hour went by, and it's like, no, it's only been 5 minutes. Where did the time go? That's a state of flow.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of immersion, it sounds like in work that you've done, you have created what's typically called an immersive environment, where the ship's tangible physical presence is, you can see it on the screen, and the equipment and the tools and so forth, and perhaps other characters as well. Typically that word immersion or immersive associates with the skin of a game, It's what you can see. But I get the feeling that when you used the word immersive a moment ago, it goes below the surface. It's not just about the artwork and about the sound effects. There's something deeper going on. Is that true?
I think when I think about immersion, I think about, people do use that concept of presence and immersion, and that typically has to do with high fidelity and these sorts of things as kind of the discussion. And I have not seen it be the case that you need high fidelity or advanced graphics to accomplish immersion. You certainly do not need that for flow, right? Anyone who's played a mobile game at all would be able to say, oh, Angry Birds is not particularly advanced graphics, neither is Tiny Wings or Flappy Birds, which was all the rage a few months ago. I think immersion happens, to me, it's that concept once we're deeply engaged. And even though there's like a textbook definition distinction between immersion and engagement, I don't really think that it matters to us as game designers, as serious game designers, and people that want to make a difference in the world and training through the concept of a game and the basics. I don't think we care about that as much. I think what we care about is meeting the requirements of flow so that our players can experience our content without being aware that they're experiencing learning, without thinking about that they're learning, and engage in the content because they're deeply involved in the challenges and the tasks are clear and the feedback that they're getting about the game is directly connecting them and they're not distracted. They have all the requirements. They get into a state of flow, and in the meantime, they've been consuming content that then gets stored in the appropriate places in their brain. Right. As long as that content is authentic and teaching the right things that we want them to learn.
Now, let me just ask a question about that fifth pillar that you added to the four that I mentioned, which was art.
Yeah.
Probably a big mistake that's commonly made in serious game design and development is the artwork comes first. People are so invested in how the game is going to look, how sexy it will be, how aesthetically pleasing it will be, whether it compares well to somebody else's game, that the tail almost begins to wag the dog. I'm expressing a bias there because I, as strongly as I feel about visual communication, I think it becomes second to other priorities that come first. But let me hear what you think about that. Where in your process would the creation of the skin, the virtual world, or the metaphor for reality that people can see, where does that get built and how does that affect your design work?
Well, first off, I have to start by saying that art is always the bane of my existence. So, I'm not an artist, and I don't have that capability. And later we'll talk about what does it mean to have one capability and not another, and whether you should code or you should do art. What should you do as a game designer? I'm not an artist, which means I can't control that. I can't develop that. I can't make that happen, even if I look at something and can know what isn't appealing. I think to me, though, it's just like instructional design and this means they need to be involved the whole process. So for us, we would involve the artists right up front because they're pulling in the same information to create the artistic theme as the game designer is to try to create a holistic theme and create flow. And the coders are to create the simplest product that they can build that will meet the requirement, and the instructors, they're all working together to do that. So I think that they're involved in the whole process. I think I have not seen that the artists are usually first. What I often do see, though, is that art becomes the whole focus. What does it look like? What's the graphics? Is it going to be super high fidelity? We're going to make this high fidelity, immersive, virtual 3D world, and that takes a lot of money and time. And so as a serious game designer, and I'm guessing the people listening to this, I wouldn't focus on that. I think you can build the exact product that you need to do the training that you want to do, and you can use minimal graphics. If you can see a title on a mobile that's got 8-bit, little texture-based graphics, and yet people can get deeply immersed in that, then my belief is that in almost all cases you can make a simple graphic, simple avatars, or as simple as you can make them with whatever budget you've got to meet your training needs.
And the work you've done at your company, has it been 2D or 3D for the most part?
We do primarily 3D. The worlds are 3D, the environments are 3D, and then we have avatars mixed in. And we have and 2D is always involved because you have menus, you have UIs, you have interfaces, you have buttons that fly on, and textures and splash screens. Those are all 2D. So yeah, most of that work is in a 3D environment.
Interesting. Okay, so let's move to that question you sort of called out a moment ago about the intersection between different competencies. And the way I phrase this is I see the world as divided, this is really simplistic, but between people with a more of
This is
a,
your bias coming out, right?
I'm biased all over the place in our conversation. I'm so sorry. But you know, you've got creative people and you've got technical people. That is a really dumb thing to say because everybody is both creative and technical, at least in the
Sure.
serious games or game world. But anyway, I think people do kind of lean one way or the other. And I've noticed that the people who seem to be most comfortable in working on game projects have a foot in each world. They're not completely blindsided by one or the other, although their main competencies may be in one versus another. But I wonder if you could talk about this. Is it possible to be a good designer without being an engineer or a programmer? And is it possible, on the other hand, to be a good engineer or game developer without having some skills in design?
Right. I think I think that's a really insightful question to look at. What kind of skills do we need to bring if we're looking at this from a game designer's perspective? And I guess I think about like, who are the icons of game design? Who are the heroes? You know, who's my heroes? Who do I look at in the industry and say these people are the exemplars? Well, I might look at Sid Meier, right, creator of Civilization, or I might look at Will Wright, created The Sims and SimCity, or Jonathan Blow, who created Braids, great inspiration, or more recently even Jennifer Chen, right, who makes games like Flow and Flower and Journey. These are the kind of guys I think, and I'm sorry if I'm leaving out any females. Those are the ones that I associate with. They inspire me, and they've inspired hundreds of millions of people with their products. And I look at them and say, well, what are their backgrounds? What did they do? Well, they were all programmers. Across the board, they were all programmers. So does that mean that you need to be a programmer to be an effective game designer? I think what it means to me is that you, as a game designer, need to have other skills that you bring. Some people call this the idea guy. If you're the idea guy and just the idea guy, there's lots of idea guys and everybody wants to be the idea guy. What matters with an idea is if you can execute the idea. So you start with an idea, great, you flesh it out, you work it out, you do some paper models, you go through some processes, you prototype it, you throw it away. Do another one, you go through some process, you build it, you throw it away. And you do that over and over and over, and you keep improving and iterating and making new designs and concepts and throwing them away. And you can only do that if you have some sort of skill set to be able to create that, whether that's programming or art. I think you need one of those.
It sounds like you're saying you need a translational skill. You need to be able to get from the purely conceptual to
I think that's true.
a tangible manifestation that someone can react to.
Exactly, and I think here's why. If you work at a really, really large company, if your goal is to work at a major AAA title, and I have been in some of them, you can get away with being just a pure game designer, having a degree in that and just doing that, because the teams are so large. If you're going to build a serious game or a training game or gamification, you're not going to have a team that's that large. That's not the kind of budget you're dealing with. You're going to be dealing with a very, very small budget. And so at that point, you need more than just ideas and just concepts and just spreadsheets and numbers. You probably want to be able to contribute something else, whether that's something to do with the web or something to do with the programming language or something to do with the art, whether it's 2D, something. I think you need to go out and improve one or other set of skills. It doesn't have to necessarily be really deep. I think you do need something there, though.
Okay. I'm going to hold on to that word translation too as a learning, a teaching point for our audience. That it's not enough to be able to conceptualize. It is enough in some ways to be able to come up with good concepts, but you have to go beyond that point, I think is what you're saying. And the artwork or the programming are two examples of how you can do that.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, you talked about flow, and I think you expressed a view that flow is a driver of good design. Did
Right.
I, is that true?
Yes, absolutely. I think flow is the number one factor that we should be considering as designers, whether that's from entertainment games, serious games, training games, or gamification. I also believe that that is just as much a driver in pure simulation. So in the M&S world, the fact that we can get into flow is just as important across all of those spectrums for people consuming our content, and especially if they're doing it to train or to learn. Yes, absolutely. I think that's the number one. There are others. There are three others I think that are key. I think that one is the most important.
It's interesting. I view flow as not so much the journey rather than the destination, right?
Right.
But a lot of game design is about the destination versus the journey because you're pointing yourself at rewards. Or in a serious game, you're pointing yourself at the mastery of certain competencies.
Right.
And so it almost seems like there's an interesting balance that has to go on there because flow as a key driver of good game design is almost letting you, and there's a zen about that. You're in the moment versus trying to leave this moment to get to the end game.
Right.
Any validity to that?
I think when we start a CS game project, we always start with the outcomes. So we want to train X, and we're going to be able to measure X. We specifically go after outcomes that are measurable. So we want to improve their ability to navigate a ship. We want to improve the team's communication while performing a gallbladder surgery. We want the people in the perioperative environment to improve their communication as a team by playing this game. So we start with the outcomes. So there's no question that that's the goal. And then what we do is we say, okay, we can't tackle the universe in this game. We're not going to solve everything. These are the goals that we want. We want to be able to measure them. These are the outcomes. Now, how are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? They already have lectures. They already have classwork. All of your students are going to have materials online. They're going to be watching videos and PowerPoints and interviews like this and going to meetings and reading books. They already have all that. So we're trying to do something different. We're trying to bring something different to their education process. And what we're trying to do to bring different is a deep, deep immersion, a deep engagement, getting in a state of flow and consuming content willingly, wantingly, to be deeply and motivated and deeply engaged in that. And what's going to happen with that is you're going to follow a basic recipe, essentially. And if you follow that recipe, you strongly get down to a path where you sort of get this magical flow. And it's really quite amazing to me that whether you're building a website or whether you're writing a book, whether you're building a lecture, or whether you're building a training game, this key recipe ends up being the primary motivator for all of it.
Wonderful. Now we're coming near to the end of our time, so I want to move on to the last question.
Sure.
In which you get to stroke your beard like the wise man and say, yeah, you're going to need to work on that.
It's been a long time since I've had a beard. My wife made me shave it up.
So, but in your role as clean-shaven wise man, if you could, if you were sitting in a room with some young people who are looking at serious games as a career path,
right? Serious
games, simulation. If they would look at your company as the kind of company they would eventually go and apply for a job with, right, how would you advise them to best prepare so that what they bring to the table is going to be appreciated by someone like yourself?
So I had some students come through a little while back, and these were all pretty bright students, and they were coming through having a similar kind of question: what can they do? And what was interesting is when I looked at them, I looked out and I saw I saw all of these people who wanted to do something great. And yet, at that moment, they were all just average. They all wanted the same thing, and yet they didn't have any experience or any skill. And they were all just average people. I said, I'm going to tell you the secret of success. And I walked them through the story of my success. So I had 10 years in software development experience, and I was okay, I was average. Went to Alion, and that's when I flipped a switch, and I decided I wasn't going to be average. I was going to be excellent. I was going to be the best. And the way that I went about doing that is that I began to better myself. Every day after my work, I worked on stuff to continue pushing myself. I accepted a growth mindset, and I said, I'm going to try this. It's almost beyond my ability, and I'm going to fail. And then I'm going to learn from that and prove that capability, and then I'm going to go out and try it again. And I continue to do that by reading books, by doing management, by doing speaking, by doing programming, learning about shaders, and then writing papers, and then writing presentations and speaking and doing things that made me terrified to do them. And I did them anyway. And then later in my career, I decided, okay, I've done that, now what? So I went off and started my own thing on the side and began to continue to push and to develop products both at work and at night, and to continue pushing and always continue to pushing myself. And if you do that, whether you're a student, whether you're employed, whether you're in college, wherever you are in your career, if you push yourself, say it's an hour a day and 3 or 4 hours on Saturday and Sunday, or whatever amount of time that it is that you can contribute. If you're doing more of that than the people who are your peers, who are next to you, then by definition, over time, you will no longer be average. And if you do that over the course of years, you will be excellent.
Right. I'm hearing echoes of Malcolm Gladwell.
Yes.
In this advice, and I think it's great advice. I think you're basically saying, if you choose to excel and you commit yourself to that path, you will excel. It's not about what somebody's going to give you. It's about what you're going to go out and get.
It definitely is. And it's not about, I see students that come in and they interview and they're like, well, I did my classes. I'm like, well, what else did you do? Where are your side projects? Where are if you're an artist, where's your portfolio stuff that you went home every night and you were working on perfecting the face or the portrait? And if they're a developer, well, where's your stuff that you've been developing and releasing? If you're a designer, well, show me what you've built. Where is the things that you've built that I can look at and say, this is a person who is continuing to push themselves, and by the time they get to where I'm interviewing them, it will be obvious.
Well, Curtis, you have entitled yourself now to grow a beard as a wise man. That's a very profound piece of advice, and I'm going to let the interview stop on that, because I really think it resonates beautifully, and I'm so glad you said it just the way you did.
Thank you. I think deliberate practice is very well proven. The research on that speaks for itself, and it's just a matter of, do you want to commit yourself to doing it?
All right. So I'm going to stop the interview, but hold on there for just a minute, okay? Thank you so much for joining me.
Quite welcome, and I wish you all the best success.
Okay.